The night the river tried to swallow the town, Ray Hart gave away the only umbrella she owned to a man who scowled at the rain as if it had lied to him. She thought that was the end of it, a small kindness in a world that forgot small things. She didn't know he would return an hour later with the thunder inside a diesel engine, old paint trembling, headlights carving the storm, a bus that would redraw the edges of her life. Before we begin, if this kind of story speaks to your heart, feel free to share where you're reading from. It's always beautiful to see how far stories like this can travel. Enjoy the story. Part I, the diner in the rain. Ray always knew the sound of rain inside the White Lantern Cafe. It didn't just patter. It found the tin roof above the kitchen and made a drumming circle out of it. A fast heartbeat that kept pace with the grill's hiss and the bell's trill and the coffee machine's beleaguered groan. The neon sign, "Open all night," flickered like a tired eyelid, and water drew silver veins across the front window until the street outside became a smeared watercolor. She was 26 and small enough that the trays seemed always on the verge of pulling her to the floor, but she balanced them like a dancer and smiled like someone who had done the math on how many smiles it took to earn rent, groceries, and the copay for a pediatric inhaler. The strap of her apron rubbed a raw fray into the back of her neck, and the only thing that kept her from checking the cracked phone screen in her pocket every 5 minutes was the steady cadence of motion. Coffee refill, ketchup bottle, check on table 4. Napkins to the couple arguing about an anniversary and the right way to move salt around a plate to make it feel full. Maya had drawn a sun in the corner of Ray's order pad in purple crayon before daycare that morning. Ray had tucked the pad into her apron like a charm. Now, each order up caught her by the collarbone and dragged her forward. When she did check her phone, there were 2 messages from her ex, Trevor, about the custody hearing tomorrow and whether she'd gotten her act together yet. She tucked the phone away and pressed her palms into the cool metal counter until her heartbeat came back down to being just hers. "He's in again," Pillar whispered as she breezed past, hip knocking the fridge door shut with a practiced motion. Pillar's winged eyeliner never smeared. She was one of those women the rain seemed to slide off of out of respect. Ray didn't need to ask who. The man at the end of the counter had claimed that corner stool like a monument sometime after Halloween and hadn't given it back. He was in his 70s, maybe, though time had a way of putting a second set of years on some people's faces. He had shoulders like he'd carried a long past on them and forgotten how to set it down. He wore a frayed olive jacket with an embroidered patch the color of old mustard on the sleeve, something like a bird with outstretched wings, and a cap that said Ridge County Transit in faded block letters. He never took off his cap. He had a tobacco-deepened voice and a face like a hill, a few hard lines, a few soft, all weathered. He didn't like his coffee hot. He didn't like it lukewarm either. He liked it, not wrong, which was a temperature only he seemed to know. He'd flip the mug toward him with 2 nicotine-yellowed fingers and purse his lips, tasting the air above it, then drink without so much as a glance up, as if the coffee and he shared a private life and polite society needn't intrude. What he did like was complaining. He did it in a way that felt less like a desire for change and more like a ritual he didn't know how to leave behind. "You switched brands," he said the first time he sat down weeks before. "This ain't the roast you used to have." "We didn't," Ray had lied, then told the truth. "We did." "Figures," he had said, as if the world had been a good idea gone stale. Tonight he watched the rain. Ray watched him watch the rain. When she tipped the carafe, he shifted the cup 3 inches to the left without looking, and the coffee found porcelain as surely as if the mug had moved itself to meet her. "Storm's not playing," she said, because silence around some people felt like a dare. "Storm's doing what storms do," he replied. "It's people who get fancy, that's where trouble starts." She set down the creamer, a handful of sugars. His hands were steady, but the skin at the back trembled like leaves in a draft. She noticed the patch on his sleeve again. Not a bird, a wheel, wings along the sides like an emblem from the 40s, the words along the rim, Ridge County Transit, every road home. "You used to drive?" she asked. "Used to," he said. He sipped, then added, "I got a thing about telling stories to people who ain't asked for them." "I just asked." He cracked what might have been a smile if it had time to find itself. Then he pushed the creamer aside and said, "Coffee ain't wrong today." She took that as a compliment. It was the closest he'd come. The bell over the door clanged as a gust of wind shouldered its way into the diner, slipping shoulders under coats and spinning napkins off plates. Doug, the owner, went to the door braced and leaned his weight against it until it clanged shut. "You hear that?" he shouted. "Town put the river at warning 3. Pillar's eyebrows curved up into little black wings. "That means we close." "That means we don't panic," Doug said. "What if warning 4? Doug didn't answer. Ray checked her phone again. 1 bar of signal, a new text from Miss Lou, the daycare lady. "Storm's worse than expected, honey. We moved the kids to St. Andrew's Fellowship Hall. Basement. We'll be here until parents get through." Ray felt something unclench between her ribs and then reclench around her heart. Through meant through what? The north side of town, where St. Andrew's perched on its little knuckle of hill, would be the last to go. The daycare was supposed to be closed by 6. It was past 7. Ray texted back with quick thumbs, "I'm coming as soon as my boss lets me." She didn't add, "if the streets let me, if the river lets me, if the world lets me." There was a dark joy in the storm, that's what Ray would later admit to. A feeling that everything and everyone laughed at privately, banks and teachers and lawyers and men who wrote you messages about getting your act together, had to shut up for a second and listen. You couldn't talk over the weather when it decided to speak. She finished her section and leaned on the counter for a breath, one hand on the carafe, the other flat against the cool stainless steel. On the stool, the old man pulled his jacket tighter. "You shouldn't go out in it," he said. "Someone's got to," she said. "Someone else. There isn't anyone else, not for some of us." His gaze flicked up as if to find what made her voice say that, and didn't linger long enough to be rude. "You on late?" he asked. "Double," she said. "1 more hour. Then home," she nodded. "You got a cap, a hood?" "I've got an umbrella," she said, and then remembered the umbrella wasn't where it was supposed to be. It wasn't by the back door in the milk crate with orphaned hats. It wasn't under the counter. When had she last seen it? She'd left it on the bus last week, she'd thought, then found it leaned against her own stoop the next morning, neatly propped. Someone in the building, Mr. Keene from 2B, had put it there for her, the way he returned stray mail and shopping carts but scowled if you thanked him. "Yes," she said, more to herself than him. "I've got one." The first transformer blew somewhere up the block and the lights flickered. Fake sunlight in the diner flared and then dimmed, leaving the neon sign and the open kitchen like stage pieces from a sudden stranger play. The noise of the storm seemed to grow teeth, tearing at the edges of the building. Doug hustled up to the counter. "We're closing at 8, he announced. "Power goes out. I'm not sitting in the cold frying eggs." Pillar lifted her chin. "We got people here." "Then they can finish their coffee and find somewhere with candles," Doug said. Stress made his wit brittle. He was a good man in most weather and not great in disaster. He had 2 boys and an ex-wife who had moved 3 states away last year. If he ever said warning 4, it would be because he divided up the staff into who had to get home to whom and counted himself last. The old man at the counter set down his cup. "You close this early," he muttered. "You'll have folks stuck." "Folks will be stuck anyway," Doug muttered back. "We're not a shelter." He was wrong, Ray knew. Places don't get to choose what they are in a storm. The weather decided, need did. You did if you remembered how. At 7:50, the bell over the door clanged again as a woman in a long black coat pushed inside, dragging a kid whose sneakers squeaked like frightened mice. "Any phones work in here?" the woman called, panting. "Our car stalled." Ray couldn't make out their faces in the shadow, only the sheen of their coats. She saw Maya's shoes in the kids' shoes, green-faced frogs with chipped rubber smiles. The kid's hand, small and bony and sure, clung to the woman's pocket and pulled, as if pulling could rearrange the ideas adults had about what to do next. "Sit," Ray said immediately. "Tell me what you need." "No time," the woman said, but sat anyway. That was how it went. People who say they don't have time still sit when you set down a mug of something hot and a small plate with a biscotti like a flag of surrender to kindness they hadn't ordered. The old man watched Ray without blinking now. "Don't you got somewhere?" he asked. "St. Andrew's," she said quietly. "Fellowship Hall." "How'd you know?" "Because the Baptists are smart," he said. "Their basement's got 2 exits." Another transformer went with a sound like a gun in a canyon. The diner's lights hiccuped and died and came up again in emergency low, pink neon reflecting off puddled linoleum like the inside of a seashell. The air changed, too, a thinner hum when the fans stilled. The grill sighed. Last call, Doug said helplessly. He put on the voice he used when cops came in. Pillar set down a tray, wiped water from the inside of the door with her wrist and said, "We're candles now." "Don't be cute," Doug snapped. Then he said it again, softer. "Don't be cute, we're candles now." The old man put money on the counter. Coins and a folded 20. Ray reached for the receipt book. He shook his head. "Keep it on," he said. "You'll need it when fools come in." "You're leaving?" she asked. "Storm's not playing," he said simply. "And I got a place worse than here to be." He slid off the stool. He didn't seem unsteady until he stood. Then for a second the world rocked under him, and he put one palm flat on the counter to steady himself before he realized he'd done it and drew his hand back as if he'd touched a hot pan. At the door, he paused and looked at the state of the rain, how it fell in thick ropes now, like someone had thrown the sky's hair over the side of the heavens. He didn't have a cap with a hood. He had that old cap and a jacket whose seams had been resewn so many times the thread itself was two different ages. He looked left, then right, like a man who didn't trust either direction to be the right way to regret. Ray grabbed her umbrella off the hook by the back door. It was blue with white dots, cheap and thin-boned but honest about it, open, close, sit quietly in a corner until summoned. She slipped through the swinging doors at the back, cut down the narrow galley behind the booths, and met him at the front. The bell chimed his hesitation. "Here," she said. He turned. He looked at the umbrella, then at her, then at the umbrella again like it was a joke he wasn't in on. "I ain't a man who takes charity," he said, though his eyes weren't mean when he said it. They were wary, how quickly a gift becomes a hook in your throat. "It's not charity," she said. "It's a deal." "What's the deal?" "You bring it back. In a storm like this, eventually," she said, "when you can, and you, I'm going to St. Andrews. You can't go on foot. The buses have stopped." He breathed out a sound that might have been a laugh if he hadn't lost the habit a while back. "Buses stop," he said, almost under his breath, like he was reciting scripture turned on its head. "Take it," Ray said. He reached, then hesitated again, then closed his hand around the curved handle. His knuckles were a topographical map. "What's your name?" he asked. "Ray." "I'm Harlan," he said. "My grandma was a Harlan," she lied, "because people trusted you more if you put them somewhere in your family tree. Or maybe it wasn't a lie, maybe everyone had half of someone else's grandmother inside them." He nodded, as if that settled something between them, and stepped into the rain. The umbrella opened with a clatter like a flock of blackbirds beating at a barn roof, then bloomed into that ridiculous blue. It bumped twice against passing wind. He moved into it, a stubborn shape under a fragile sky, and vanished into water. Ray stood with her palm on the door glass, fingers sweating against the cold. She was the kind of person who kept promises even when the world was a broken gum machine spitting out surprises she hadn't paid for. Replacing the umbrella would carve out a piece of her paycheck. She did the math because she always did: groceries, bus pass for the month, rent due on the 1st, Trevor and his text messages, the hearing, a dress she could pretend was respectable in front of a judge who liked men in ties and women in quiet. The lights flickered again. This time they didn't come back. Part Roman 2, Warning 4, they don't name it like that in Ridge County. They call it the water's mood. Tonight the water was on its furthest edge of angry. St. Andrews pushed a message to the town Facebook page, doors open. Basement safe. Fellowship Hall has blankets. Ray couldn't read it. The signal gave up like a tired animal crawling under a porch. More people pushed into the diner, soaked and breathless, eyes wide. It didn't matter that the lights were out and the grill was cold. In storms, a diner becomes a church without priests. Ray went from table to table with a lighter and a box of stubby candles left from last New Year's. She lit each one like a blessing, a small gold circle of warmth where people leaned in to say their names and their plans, to barter information, to anchor their stories to someone else's hearing. A man came in with his dog in a tote bag, damp nose poking out like a submarine. Two teenage girls clutched each other, and a plastic folder of sheet music, as if it came with flotation devices. The woman in black poured her hands around the coffee cup to warm them, and told Ray that the water on Maple had climbed to the curb, that cars were gliding without permission 3 feet to the left of where you put them, that someone had shouted about the old mill road going under. "Anybody got a charger?" someone asked, lifting up their dead phone like a homeless bird. The flood did not care. Doug went behind the counter and started pulling down the hurricane lanterns he kept for when hunters came through in February. His hands shook a little, but he was useful. He was always useful when given a list. Pillar came up close to Ray's ear. "You have to go," she said. "What if I drown?" Ray whispered, because saying it out loud is sometimes the only way to make fear put on the right size. "You're not drowning," Pillar said. "We'll figure it out. I'll cover you. You run. You bring your baby here and we'll be mother hens. Go now." "I gave my umbrella to a man who probably talks to his slippers," Ray said hopelessly, and Pillar, because she loved her, laughed that barking laugh. "You did what?" "He was going out in it," Ray said. "He's 70, he'd have turned to paper." Pillar hugged her with one arm, quick and hard. "You're a soft idiot. Get your coat." Ray grabbed her coat off the hook and shrugged into it. People at the tables reached out and put hands on her elbows, touched her shoulder like strangers touch someone carrying a candle. They know it can be dropped and they add their little warmth in case it helps. At the door, Doug caught up to her. "You sure?" "Sure is a luxury," she said. "I've got a second-hand certainty." "Take mine," he said, and tried to shove his coat at her. He was soaked already. He looked like a man pretending his clothes were a choice and not a situation. "Keep it," she said. "You've got people. You've got your girl." "I'll be back," Ray said, saying it for him as much as herself. "With her, St. Andrews," he said. "Watch the corner on Cedar. They dug up the street last month and never filled it proper." Ray nodded. Her throat closed around a thank you she didn't have time to empty. She hit the door with her shoulder. The bell seemed to holler, but it might have been the wind. The rain met her with that blunt astonishment it reserves for people who don't understand yet. She stepped outside and the world went to watercolor and thunder. The cold went through her coat as if it had been waiting for the invitation. She crouched under the awning long enough to get her bearings, then set her eyes on the corner of Cedar, braced, and pushed into the rain. The first block took 10 minutes, the second took 1. Flood math is strange like that. Where the street slanted even the slightest bit upward, she could move. Where it dipped, the water gathered and stood like a door you have to knock on with your legs while the hinges argued. She thought of the umbrella in Harlan's hand, the ridiculous blue. She hugged herself, kept her mind small, 1 foot, another foot, car there, fire hydrant there, lamp post here. The water had started talking in a language she almost understood, where it humped, where it pulled, where it tried. At the corner of Cedar and Maple, the water came from left and right like two cousins who didn't like each other meeting in the middle of the room. Ray slipped. Her left sneaker found nothing. She pitched forward and caught herself on a parked car, both palms slapping paint. "Don't be a hero," she told herself, out loud, because heroes drown. "Be a mother." Then a horn sounded, the deep, honking baritone of old yellow buses that you feel behind your sternum before you understand what it is. Headlights cut through rain a block away, high and round and too high to be a normal car. A shape moved in the storm, a rectangular stubbornness, a white sign above the windshield where a route number once lived, where now black marker scrawled a single word, safe. The bus turned the corner like a ship turning a harbor. Its wheels found purchase on roads that cars had already given up on. The engine groused and then roared, and the whole machine looked like it wanted to clench its fists and say, "Fine, let's see about this then." The bus stopped in front of the white lantern. Ray's feet were in 2 inches of water and a mindset of steel when she saw the door swing open with a long-limbed sigh. The steps held 4 inches of water on the bottom tread. The driver leaned and peered out, rain making strings off the brim of his cap. You couldn't mistake the shape of Harlan even if you'd only known him for a week. He was the kind of man whose silhouette showed the life he'd lived, shoulders forward, the little round of stomach born of coffee and 5 hours sitting a day, the wedge of usefulness. He had her umbrella in his lap, unopened, like a talisman securing his right to act. "Are you kidding me?" Ray shouted above everything, laughing, crying, hating, loving all in one. She was not a woman who swore at old men, but she swore anyway. "What is that?" "It's a bus," he shouted back, which was the kind of answer people give when they think humor might get someone through a door faster. He lifted the umbrella and, gentle as a father, put it up, its cheap bones clattering, then leaned out and held it over the stairs where Ray stood. The absurdity broke something open in her. She ran. She climbed the steps. He took her wet elbow like it belonged to his list of worries. The door folded shut. The storm went from every side to 2 inches of glass. The bus was its own kind of room, lighted by the dim overhead strips and Westinghouse nostalgia. There were 6 people already inside. The woman in the black coat with the squeaking child had made it from the diner to the door just as the bus appeared, their table left with the half-drunk coffee like a small shrine. Mr. Keene from 2B sat in the third row with his grocery tote on his lap like a shield. He grunted when he saw Ray, approval, exasperation, both. Two teenagers still clutching their sheet music huddled together like birds. Pillar stood near the front, her eyeliner still immaculate, one hand on the pole, hair plastered to her cheek. "I saw him drive up," she said. "I'm not letting you go out with the wind like this without backup." "I'm the backup," Harlan said. "We're going to St. Andrews." He put the bus in gear like he was winding a watch. Ray wrapped her hands around a seat back. "Where did you get this?" "Donated it to myself," Harlan said. "Bought it at a county auction 2 years ago. They were tearing out the yard. Said I'd turn it into a shed. You can't turn a bus into a shed, it remembers. You just had it ready." "Never mind ready," he said. She was waiting, needed a battery, needed a reason. He flicked a switch. Wipers squeaked. He flicked another switch. The fan glugged once, then submitted. The bus shuddered, a dog shaking water from its coat. "You can't do this," Doug said suddenly, appearing from the back, breathless. He had his hand on the rail. He had the look of a man who had decided to be wrong in public and didn't care. "You can't be liable." "Sir," Harlan said, gentle but iron, "I assure you there's nothing left to be liable for if we leave folks sitting in their kitchens." Doug took a breath, exhaled, looked at Ray. "Bring her back," he said. He meant the diner, the night, the order of things waffled and fried and poured until laughter replaced fear. He meant Maya. "I will," Harlan said. The bus eased forward. The street disagreed, then agreed. Harlan drove as though he were reading a book he loved but hadn't picked up in years, fingers lightly on the wheel, eyes narrowed not in suspicion but in concentration. He had a way of looking at the road that made the water reconsider its posture. "Why?" Ray asked him quietly. The bus hummed as if it had a throat. She was suddenly embarrassed by the question because too many answers sprung forward with their hands up and their truths half naked. Why not? Because someone had to. Because he owed more than change on a counter. Because the bus was a song he still knew the words to. He didn't answer at first, then barely moving his lips, he said, "I drove this town 30 years. People forget. Roads don't. I can sit on a stool and complain, or I can put my hands where they do something. Tonight I remembered why God gave me hands." The bus hit a pothole that somebody had written a petition about last winter and hadn't gathered enough signatures to shame the county into half filling. The bus grunted and kept going. "Route," Mr. Keene called as though this was still a normal bus with normal stops. "St. Andrews," Harlan said. "Then let me think." Ray looked down. The floor of the bus was wet enough to reflect the overhead lights. Her shoes squelched. She tightened her mouth and thought of Maya, the little gap between her front teeth. The way she said monster as if it had mom in it for a reason. The inhaler with the purple cap, Miss Lou's patient hands. Outside, Ridge County's small downtown tried to hold itself upright, a bar with its purple sign, a hardware store with buckets stacked in the display like the idea of bailing out in miniature. Water bent the edges of everything. The bus moved into it. Up ahead, Cedar dipped. Harlan took the bus at an angle so that the water slapped the side rather than the front grille. "You don't show fear," he murmured to the steering wheel. "You get pushed." "You can't talk to the bus," Ray said, half hysterical. "You can talk to anything that holds you," Harlan said. "It's rude not to." The bus made it through the first dip like a missionary sneaking into a godless party and convincing everyone to serve punch. In the second, the bus slowed. The water, patient as sin, rose mid-axle. The engine coughed. "Don't you start," Harlan said. He reached down and knocked something with his knuckles. It wasn't hitting, it was persuasion. The engine steadied. He looked at Ray. "That's not how mechanics teach it. That's how old men get away with pretending they learned something on the farm." "Were you a mechanic?" she asked. "I was a driver," he said. "And a man whose wife said, if it has wheels, you forgive it. That's your trouble." She left and I kept forgiving. Pillar whistled under her breath. "I like him," she said. "Don't," Ray said automatically. "He's trouble." She felt a wild gratitude swelling in her chest like a storm cloud. She let herself look directly at it, the way you sometimes let yourself feel the thing so it doesn't have to tug you by your sleeve. He had come back with a bus. He could have gone home and shut the door and done what men do, pretend they didn't see what they didn't want to fix. But he had come back. Outside St. Andrews, the bus hissed and sighed into a stop like a man easing into a pew. The church had candles in the windows like old New England fantasies. The fellowship hall door stood open. People moved in buzzed born lines, handing in blankets, handing out casseroles that someone had assembled out of the recesses of their freezer with a fierce eye on hospitality. Ray bolted down the aisle between the pews of waiting folding chairs. A volunteer at the door stopped her with a soft palm. "Names," the woman said. "Maya Hart," Ray said. 5, purple jacket, hair in 2 puffs. The woman scanned a clipboard. Her finger found a line and then moved, a small bird landing. "Here," she said. "Down the hall, second room. We put the littles together so they don't scare the older ones. We read them stories. The lights flicker, but it's like camping." Ray ran. The carpet flexed under her soaked sneakers with a pleasant squelch that would have been funny on any other night. She slowed at the door to the second room because she knew if she went in like a storm, she would scare the storm right into Maya's chest. Inside, kids in various degrees of pajamas and confusion lay on gym mats under quilts. Shadows moved on the painted Noah's Ark mural. Miss Lou sat on a chair with a book in her lap and a flashlight shining up under her chin, making her look like the kind of good ghost traditions tell you to follow. Maya was exactly as Ray had described, but somehow new. Her cheeks had 2 lines of salt dried on them where tears had traveled earlier and found nothing left to mop them up. She sat with her back against a crate of rubber balls, hugged a stuffed rabbit by its long ear, and listened so hard to Miss Lou that she planted her palms on her knees to keep from flying away. When she saw Ray, she made the sound children make that isn't quite a word because it has too much joy and relief inside it to come out in pieces. She stood and ran and hit Ray in the shins like a wave. Ray fell to her knees and grabbed her and put her face into the place where Maya's neck met Maya's shoulder and breathed and breathed and breathed. "You came," Maya said. "Always," Ray said. "You got wet," Maya said. "I met the rain," Ray said. "It's not as tough as it thinks." Maya leaned back and considered her with that grave look children get when they're 5 and suddenly know something and don't know how to carry it. "I thought you drowned." "I didn't," Ray whispered. "I found a bus." Maya's eyes rounded. "Like at school." "Like a miracle," Ray said, not caring who heard and who thought that word belonged to other situations. "But yes, like at school." They gathered, hugged, thanked Miss Lou with a gratitude that made Ray's eyes hurt. Outside, Harlan had turned the bus's interior into a triage of arrivals and departures. It wasn't just St. Andrews. A volunteer came to the bus door with a list asking if they could check for a man in a wheelchair on 10th. A teenage boy arrived carrying a plastic bag of insulin and a look of terror. Harlan slid him onto a seat as if he were his own. Mr. Keene had decided to play host and was asking people their names like interrogations were hospitality. Pillar organized blankets out of nowhere. "Where else?" Harlan called when Ray brought Maya aboard and wrapped her in her own coat. Maya's hair smelled like Play-Doh and the vanilla lotion Miss Lou used. Ray felt stitches start inside herself, delicate and decisive. "There's Mrs. Duffy on Maple," Ray said. "She's got 3 cats and a hip that pretends it works if you talk nice to it. And there's a whole building on 14th where the landlord leaves when it rains. And there's the old folks at Golden Pines on Baker." "I know Golden Pines," Harlan said. "They're on the hill, they'll bunker. Maple first." He called back to the bus like a showman. "Maple, all aboard for Maple." People laughed, because humor is lighter than fear and sometimes holds more. The bus pulled away from the curb with that same old dog sigh and moved into the middle of the trouble. Part Roman 3, the road remembers on Maple, they found Mrs. Duffy arguing with water from her porch swing, the way somebody fights with their reflection and hopes their better self is listening. The cats were indignantly dry on top of the refrigerator. Harlan took the incline on Maple slow, kissing the edge of the curb with the tires so that the water couldn't get ideas. Ray climbed down and sloshed to the porch with Pillar. They had to coax Mrs. Duffy like a skittish horse. Pillar turned her eyeliner into theology. "You want an audience when you tell this story," she said. "The cats can write a book, come on." On 14th, there were 2 men on the second floor of a pale green building with their heads out a window, arguing about whether to jump or to wait for someone to knock on the door like the world still worked. Harlan found the alley behind, nosed the bus in until it couldn't go anymore, then told Ray and Pillar, "Hold the line," and disappeared into the rain like a man who had been making a habit of disappearing into storms without telling anyone for years. When he came back, he had an old plastic sled, a red disc with a rope. He must have pulled off someone's rescue kit or childhood, and he had one of the men on it. He did not ask for permission. He did not apologize. He said firmly, "We are going to the bus," and because he said it like truth had left and put him in charge, they went. The roof of the hardware store lost a panel. The flag on the post office turned itself into a funnel for rain. At a corner, a sedan tried to glide past a reality it didn't like, met a floating trash can, nuzzled it like old friends, and stopped in embarrassment. "Hey," Ray said, breathless, drenched, vibrating with a posterior fear that had learned it was not the only voice that mattered. She leaned on the rail by the driver's seat. "About that patch on your arm." "My driving jacket," Harlan said. "Old uniform. It says every road home." That's the motto they came up with when they wanted to sound less like buses and more like promises. "Where was yours?" Ray asked, softer than she expected. "Your road home." "You always ask like that," he said, a little smile watering the soil where Grump lived. "Like you put your hand out flat so scared things can eat from it." "Only when people bring me entire vehicles," she said. "Fair," he said. "I lived with Ruth out past the big water tower. Single story, peonies planting themselves wherever she forgot to tell them no. She had a laugh like a screen door in summer. We had a son. He taught himself to build a kite and then got mad when the wind obeyed." "What happened?" Ray asked. "I drove," he said, "and they lived, and then he enlisted, and then he didn't come back, not in one piece, and then I drove more because the only thing that felt like forward was forward. Ruth wanted me to stop, and I didn't because stopping meant I'd see what wasn't there. So she left, I drove. This is the part where you're supposed to tell me I should have shown up more. I know, I should have." Ray shook her head. "I wasn't going to tell you what you already know. My mother told me before she died that regret is a second job you can't afford. Love is cheaper, it does the work once." He nodded twice, like her words hit something he kept behind his ribs, and he acknowledged it without letting it drop. "You mind the wheel?" he asked suddenly. "What?" she sputtered. "I can't drive a bus." "You can hold it while I drink." She put her hands on the wheel awkwardly, fingers high like she was about to play a piano piece in front of a neurotic teacher. The bus hummed. The rain extruded itself into threads against the glass. "You ever drive anything bigger than a cart?" he said, amused. "I drove my life," she said, "badly sometimes. Until it turned around and started driving me." He handed her a controlled smile. "I regret complaining about the coffee." "You should," she said. His hand trembled when he brought the thermos to his mouth. He hid it well, but she saw it. The skin on his throat had the slack of illness or age. His breath occasionally decided to be a stair he had to climb. "You all right?" she asked. He put the thermos down and took back the wheel. "I got a doctor who says words like idiopathic because he likes to sound like he knows Latin. It means we don't know why you can't breathe as much as you should. Give me a bus and I can breathe. Give me a chair and I can't." "So you choose the bus," she said. "So I choose the bus," he said. Maya had fallen asleep by then, small hand open, palm up, trusting the air itself to fill it. Ray's eyes kept going to her, as if seeing her would be a kind of medicine against the past. Harlan noticed. He didn't comment. His shoulders had a gentleness that was not the same as clasping and not the same as petting. He was an old man who had learned late how to hold things without crushing them. "Where else?" he asked. "Golden Pines," Ray said. He laughed once. "I was waiting for you to say that." Part Roman 4, the long road up Golden Pines sat on a rise beyond the ball fields, where kids in ordinary weather ran until their lungs yelled and their parents clapped as if the sky itself were a scoreboard. Tonight the field's chalk lines looked like a map of something that had been meant for a different storm. The road to Golden Pines had a section that dipped then rose hard, and in between was a stretch that loved to ice in February and had now decided to be a small river. Harlan took the first dip with a shrug and a mutter. The second, harsher, slope he approached like a man approaching an argument he knew he couldn't win with words. He said to the bus, "We don't hesitate, that's how water gets a say." The nose dipped, the bottom of the bus shook, water climbed, the engine bellowed a complaint. Halfway through, the current found the angle it wanted and pushed. The bus slid sideways 6 inches, then a foot. People inside yelled, then shut up. Ray grabbed the pole and tasted copper in her mouth, fear's weird coin. Harlan set his jaw so that the lines around it looked like a map of the Midwest. He turned the wheel into the slide the way you do on ice. The bus drifted. The water made a sound like it had been waiting to say, "I told you so." "Come on," Harlan whispered. "Be what you were born to be for me." The bus found grit. The back wheels caught. It was like an animal finding its weight on a slope. They surged forward. The bus rose out of the water with a wet slap, shook itself, and followed the road upward. People clapped because they had to let that energy out of their bodies somehow, or it would chew holes into their insides. At Golden Pines, a woman with bright lipstick and a kind of cheerful drill sergeant vibe stood under the awning like she could order rain to fight someone else for a change. "It's about time," she said, then pulled Harlan into a hug that surprised him so much his cap cocked to one side. "Harlan Pike, look at you. No bus in this county ever ran right without you talking to it." He smiled in that sideways private way. "You Catherine Baker," he said. "Since the day I was born and named after 2 saints and a liquor," she said. "You're a sight." They got 78-year-old Mr. Lawrence with his oxygen tank, a woman whose hair had been set in curls before the storm and still held like scaffolding of hope, and 2 men who bickered over a chessboard about who had been about to win while they were evacuated. The wind pushed at the doors like a boy testing the weight he could bench press, impolite and earnest. Harlan glanced at the sky, then at Ray. "Last loop," he said. "Back to St. Andrews, then the white lantern to tell the world you kept the lights on." Then, he didn't finish. He didn't have the energy to promise and fail. He didn't have the personality to promise and not try. They headed back down the hill. The river had decided to take itself seriously while they were gone. Where there had been a puddle, there was a lakelet, and where there had been a submerged curb, there was now a line of white foam like a lip. The bus felt heavier, not because of the 80-some souls it had held and let hold it that night, but because the road's fever had risen. Harlan's breaths came shorter. Ray watched his chest move and felt like she was counting down something she didn't want to count down. At the harder dip, the bus entered the water again, and this time the water got cocky. The engine hiccuped twice. The third time it stalled. The lights dimmed for a second. The sound of just rain and not engine replaced the world. There is a particular quiet that only happens in mechanical things when they stop doing what their hearts were built to do. It was that quiet. The bus felt like a held breath. Harlan's fingers flew across the dash with the intimacy of a musician in panic. "No," he said. "No." He reached down with one hand, turned something, pulled something else. The bus tried to cough. The water smug agreed with its failure. Ray felt the bus lift slightly, the back with the engine rising as if an invisible hand had flicked it. The water under them sucked and tugged. "Stay." Harlan snapped, not at the people at the bus. Ruth would have laughed at him talking to metal if she'd been here. Ruth wasn't here, Ray was. "Tell me what to do," she said. "Don't panic," he said. The snarled grin he gave her said he knew how useless that instruction can be. "I flooded her. I need you to go back. Second seat, last row, lift the rubber mat. There's a cut-off switch. If I pop it and reset, we have a prayer." "What if we don't?" she asked. "Then we swim in an orderly fashion," he said. "Go." Ray fought her way down the aisle. People were still. No one shouted. Panic had decided to be polite. Mr. Lawrence moved his oxygen mask from mouth to nose like maybe a new angle would help more air squeeze into him. Ray lifted the mat. Cold water slid under her palms like an eel. She found the switch by feeling the metal edges and the little raised circle of the toggle. On 3. Harlan called. 1, 2, the bus shifted again. Not a little, a lot. The back end drifted toward the deeper part of the dip, the part where road decided it didn't want to be visible anymore. Water got in, a sudden silver. Ray grabbed the pole. The switch was a circle under her fingers, a coin. She flipped it. The lights went out completely. The bus wasn't just quiet, it had left the idea of sound. Then a small voice from the front left said, "Mommy." And the tenderness of that word held the panic off long enough for Ray to flip the switch back when Harlan said, "Now," and for Harlan to hit the starter, not like a man coaxing an old friend, but like a man commanding a stubborn animal to remember its lineage. The engine roared. The bus shuddered. The water looked surprised. The bus pulled forward and up, and onto the angled ridge that lined the road. The distance between wheels and ditch was small. Harlan took it like a tightrope. When they hit the crest, the bus coughed twice, spat out a little white smoke, then laughed a low diesel laugh. People on the bus clapped again, and some cried, and Mr. Keene said, "That's what I call a reset," and Catherine Baker patted her hair and said, "I am not dying with this lipstick." Harlan's hands shook. He kept them on the wheel until the shaking slowed. He looked tired around the eyes the way old dogs do, the kind of fatigue you can't nap out. He took off his cap and ran his hand over his thin hair. For a second Ray thought he might lean his head back and pass out. He didn't. He placed the cap back on his head with a little nod at a god she didn't believe in but wanted to. Back at St. Andrew's, the church greeted them like a waiting mother. Volunteers lined up and began to take people off the bus in order, as if they'd rehearsed. The fellowship hall had a smell of damp wool and casseroles, which if bottled and sold would be labeled Apocalypse Comfort and cost too much. As the last of the new arrivals disembarked, Ray turned to Harlan. His hand was still on the wheel. "You need to sit," she said. "Eat, let me find you soup." "I don't eat soup," he said, then added with a small surrender, "I will today." "Then let me," he shook his head. "One more stop." "We've rescued the worst," she said. "You did it." "One more stop," he repeated, "for me." He guided the bus toward the diner. The road between the church and the White Lantern wasn't as bad. The municipal workers had built it on a spine after the flood of '98 had knocked the earlier arrogance out of them. When they rolled up in front, the neon still flickered like an eyelid in a fever dream. Inside, candles lit faces, and the regulars had become parishioners in a denomination without hymns, but with a lot of coffee and half-truths told gently. Harlan parked the bus and cut the engine. The sudden quiet was so complete, Ray could hear the rain change its mind about itself. "I brought your umbrella back," he said. "My umbrella can stay," she said. "It brought me here," he said. "Fair's fair." He held it out. It was still blue with white dots. It looked tired and proud. She took it like it was a medal. "You saved people," she said. "People saved people," he said. "I drove." "You're better at driving than most of us are at saving." "I had practice," he said. Doug came out, stood in the rain with his hands on his hips, and looked at the bus as if it were a tall tale. He looked at Harlan, then at Ray, then at Harlan again with a grudging affection he would later hide behind cynicism. "I'll say it," he said. "God bless you." "Don't give him all the credit," Harlan said, and a few people laughed, and the laugh felt like the first dry towel after a swim. Part V, the sky clears from the edges later after the first night, and the second morning came like a surprised smile out of the dark. The town stood in its wet clothes and counted its losses and its luck. The river had taken a few cars and one shed, flirted with the old mill, decided not to commit. The kids at St. Andrews made forts out of chairs and quilts and learned that heroes sometimes looked like tired men in old transit caps who returned umbrellas. The White Lantern mopped and poured, as if brewing coffee was a way to recite a prayer until you believed it. Harlan sat at his usual stool, soaked to his bones but less grumpy than any of them had the right to be. His jacket steamed gently. The patch on his arm looked suddenly newly bright, as if he had polished it with his will. Pillar slid him a bowl of soup. He grunted. Ate, smiled into the spoon as if the spoon had told a dirty joke. Ray leaned against the counter for a minute, watching him with an affection she would have rolled her eyes at 3 days ago. "You all right?" she asked. "Tired," he said. "You know you get to an age where you can hear your bones arguing about whether to forgive you for what you ask of them." "I'm 26, she said. "I hear them anyway." He was about to answer when the bell over the door chimed, and a woman stepped in with hair the color of wet straw and eyes like they had been covered by a shell, and the shell had been recently removed. She held herself in a way Ray recognized as a one-woman attempt at dignity in the face of the wild animal of desire to run. She looked around the diner as if the past had moved the furniture. "Harlan," she said, and her voice shook not because she was afraid, but because too much past was backing it thread by thread. "My God." He turned. He didn't look surprised. He looked like a man who had been waiting for a bus he wasn't sure still ran this route. "Ruth," he said. Ray froze. She gave their small conversation the privacy of pretending she was in a different story, as much as you can inside a diner that has decided to be a church that has decided to be a boat. Ruth took a step toward him, stopped, took another. "I heard," she said. "Everybody heard." She laughed a little. When I left this town, you'd have to go looking for stories. Now they find you. I didn't do it to be found, he said. I know, she said. You never did anything to be found. That was always our trouble. She paused. You look like hell. You look like you made a decision 20 years ago and slept on it too long, he said. There was no meanness in it. It was a simple fact dressed up in an old suit. You left me before I left you, she said softly. I drove, he said. I'm sorry. I know, she said, and for a second her lips pressed together so hard that an apology and a fury and a love got mashed into something else that had no name. If I asked you right now to say you'd stop, would you? Stop what? He asked. Driving, she said. Rescuing people who ain't me, choosing roads over rooms. He looked at her. He looked at the bowl of soup. He looked at the bus glistening outside like a whale napping at the dock. I don't think it takes me away anymore, he said. I think it brings me back. She breathed out. She nodded. Maybe you learned something while I was learning to be without you. Maybe I learned how to love something and hold it with one hand and still have the other free to do what's necessary. I never asked for both hands, she said. I thought you did, he said. I thought everyone did. I thought if I gave anyone less than all of it, it wouldn't be anything. I didn't know love could be a thing that had edges and compartments and still count. Ray realized she was crying and wiped her face on her sleeve like a child. Pillar kicked her gently under the counter because sometimes tiny meanness is how friends remind friends that not every emotion gets to throw a parade. The next days were long and short. The bus did more loops. It took hot meals to places where people had morning legs and afternoon hearts. It carried someone who'd had a panic attack to a clinic where a nurse with hair that looked like the sky reassured her with a clipboard. It idled outside the white lantern and became part of the scenery. Kids drew it with crayons on napkins and wrote safe in shaky block letters. Ray went to the custody hearing with her hair combed and new shoes quietly purchased from a thrift store that smelled like old good intentions. She told the judge she had a job and a baby and a plan and a bus. The judge's eyebrows did what eyebrows do when they think the facts have told them a joke. Trevor said unstable and late shifts and bad ideas. Ray said river and rescue and my daughter. The judge said words like best interests and consistency. That afternoon, she got a message, not on her phone but in her body, telling her she had done enough. The judge did not give Trevor what he wanted. He gave Ray and the bus and the city a little nod and a piece of paper that later would curl on the edges from being held too often. That night, Harlan called Ray. No, he asked Pillar to go without him to a person on the north side who needed a ride to dialysis. No, he put his hand to his chest and said, I feel funny, and then there wasn't time. He didn't die right then. He didn't die in the diner or on the bus or in a dramatic fashion that would have made the county gossip column. He sat at the counter and told Ray to stop looking at him like he was becoming a ghost at her hand. He let Ruth hold his left hand while Ray held his right. He stopped looking like a man who could pull a bus out of the mouth of a river and started looking like a man whose heart had had a noble night and wanted a break. They got him to St. Andrews, which now had nurses and solo cups and defibrillators that wanted their own sermons. He came back after a moment of leaving, the kind of coming back that makes men insist later that no. They saw nothing, no tunnel, no light, no chorus of old loves, and he breathed for another week. He sat on the bus one more time and showed Ray where the cutoff switch was without needing words. He taught Maya how to pull the cord to signal a stop, and told her she had to only use it when she meant it, which she took as an oath. The morning he didn't wake, the weather was the kind the county wrote postcards about, sky the color of a bottle of spring water, clouds like polite bridesmaids. The bus sat under the big maple and cast a shadow like a retired dog sleeping. Ray walked there with Ruth. The two of them didn't talk much. Ruth told Ray what kind of laugh Harlan had when he saw a goose cross the road holding up traffic in May. Ray told Ruth he had saved her and said it with an even voice. At the little service in the fellowship hall, Catherine Baker wore the bright lipstick, unapologetic. Mr. Keene brought a photograph of Harlan 25 years earlier standing in front of a bus with a group of kids in baseball uniforms. Pillar cried and wiped her eyeliner with the back of her hand, leaving a mesmerizing gray. Doug told a story about a night a snowstorm made him sleep on the floor of the white lantern, and Harlan brought him a blanket and told him not to tell anyone he'd done something kind. Ruth stood and, in a small voice that nonetheless filled the room the way a melody will in a tune you think you've forgotten, said, "Driving didn't take him away. It brought him where he needed to be. We just had to build the right roads." When it was over, when people had eaten cold cuts and potato salad, because sorrow always wants an ordinary thing to make it feel less like a cliff, Ray slipped out into the yard. She carried the umbrella Harlan had returned to her, the ridiculous blue with white dots. It was sunny. She opened it anyway and stood under it like a child daring the weather to try again. "Hey," Pillar said, coming up behind her. "Mrs. Duffy wants to know if we can get her cats to the vet tomorrow. One seems traumatized and the other seems annoyed. I told her we'd do both." "We," Ray said, because saying we made reality a little larger and softer. "You and me," Pillar said. "And the bus. The city council is talking about paying for a community route now. A hybrid of rescue and grocery runs and doctor visits, partly because Harlan saved their cousins and partly because it makes good press." Doug came out, hands in pockets, thrust out a folded piece of paper like it was a bill, and his generosity was a reluctant line item. "This came in for you," he said to Ray. She unfolded it. It was a note written in careful block letters. "Ray, if I don't get the breath to say it, I'll put it here. The bus will need oil in 2 weeks and a new belt by winter. Don't let the county put her in a museum. Drive her. She goes better for women. I don't know why. I got old and I regret a lot of things. I don't regret you giving me the umbrella. I don't regret bringing the bus. Don't make your life about owing. Make it about owing too. When you drive, don't hesitate. When you love, don't apologize. If there's a road to home, it's under your hands now. Harlan Pike P.S. In my glove box under the maps there's a list. It's the people you haven't met yet. Deliveries, stops, go get them." Ray closed her eyes because her eyes were a storm and the lid was a levee. When she opened them, the town looked the same and different. She felt the ridges of the steering wheel under imaginary hands. In the days that followed, she learned Harlan had kept the bus in a rust-red barn on a piece of land with peonies that had indeed planted themselves wherever Ruth's memory wandered. He had left the bus, not that you can leave a bus, but you can arrange it to the town and, in a handwritten edition, to whomever the bus listens to. The mayor squinted at that, then said, "Seems like the bus likes Miss Hart." She practiced driving when the streets were dry. She drove slow at first because slow is a prayer. She learned how the bus shifted when you smiled at it. She learned that the cord for requesting a stop is almost always pulled right after you've checked your mirror and thought, "We could go faster," as if the universe enjoys timing. She and Pillar put a sign on the route board in neat black letters. "Today's destination, home." They put another under it in marker that Maya had to hold the cap for safe. They added a sticker to the back window, a small umbrella with white dots. Kids pointed and laughed and asked for it by name. They named the bus Ruth at Ruth's insistence. Ruth allowed it with the air of a woman forgiving something she'd always planned to forgive. One evening in the blue hour, when the town was bruise-colored and lamps were the kind light only dusk makes possible, Ray parked the bus by the river. The water was now a polite guest. It ran the way rivers should run, toward something bigger than themselves without destroying what they touched. Maya slept in the second row, a crayon-sketched picture of a bus in her lap, the word safe written backwards because she wasn't looking at it, she was feeling it. Ray rested her forehead on the steering wheel and let the past and the future sit on either side of her like friends willing to be quiet if you serve them tea. She could feel the city's breath in the bus's slight heave with the cooling engine, in the way the seats held people longer than the ride did, in the fact that if you listened closely, you could hear the laughter that lived in the corners of places that have been through something together and decided to stay. She opened the umbrella in the bus and set it over the steps. It looked ridiculous. It looked perfect. It caught the first drin of a new rain starting far away and made one small sound amplified in the big space, plip. It sounded like a beginning. It sounded like a story that would be told every time the sky darkened and someone asked, "Will we be all right?" And someone else answered, "Hold on, let me check the route." Ray turned the key. The bus hummed. It was an old sound dressed for a new job. The headlights cut a path the way light always does, indifferent to arguments, committed to direction. She put her hands on the wheel and said to no one and to the whole town all at once, "Let's go," and the bus, because it loved a good imperative, listened. The road ahead wasn't straight. It had dips and petty annoyances, and a few sections the county would fix when it wanted to and not a second before. It also had crows lifting off telephone wires and kids waving from porches, and Mrs. Duffy's cats glaring through the vet's glass door like dignitaries. It had a church with a fellowship hall and a diner that pretended not to be a sanctuary, and a river that had been taught its manners for a minute. It had grief, it had laughter. It had the sound of an old man saying from somewhere, "Don't hesitate," and the sound of a young woman saying back, "I won't." As she pulled away, Ruth Pike stood on the sidewalk with her hands in the pockets of a jacket that had known both winter and love, and raised a hand to her, a little wave. Ray waved back. In the rearview mirror, the town looked like a place that had remembered itself. In the front windshield, the night's edge softened. The umbrella swung a little with the bus's motion, a silly, stubborn planet orbiting a machine built to connect everything it passed. The rain resumed, gentle at first, then earnest. It found the umbrella, it found the bus, it found the road, and everywhere it landed, it made a single, small, perfect sound that added up to a song about return.